Have you ever trusted someone so completely that the thought of them harming you never even crossed your mind? What if that trust became the very reason you never made it home? Tonight, we take you into the heart of a story that shattered a quiet English town. A story of friendship, betrayal, and a life stolen far too soon. It's the kind of tragedy that makes you question not just strangers, but the people you've known for years. And by the time you see the truth, it will be too late to turn back. Before we begin, if you're new here, make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these deep dives into real-life mysteries, crimes, and the lessons they leave behind. Your support helps us share these stories with the world, and every like, every comment helps keep the memory of victims alive. Her name was Keely Bunker, just 20 years old, with a smile that could make anyone feel at ease, and a heart so big she carried the weight of others' problems as if they were her own. In Tamworth, England, everyone who knew Keely described her as the kind of person you'd want in your corner for life. Gentle, protective, and fiercely loyal. She wasn't just a friend to her close circle. She had that rare kind of warmth that made even strangers feel like they belonged. At home, she was the protective older sister, always looking out for her two younger siblings, guiding them, inspiring them, making sure they felt safe. She adored her parents and maintained a bond with her extended family so strong that she often spent her free time caring for her disabled cousin, stepping in to give her aunt a break. For Keely, kindness wasn't something she turned on and off. It was who she was every single day, and she had dreams, big ones. Teaching was her passion. By September 2019, she just celebrated her 20th birthday and was days away from interviewing for an assistant teacher position at the very school she once attended as a child. The nostalgia of walking those same halls she had as a little girl mixed with the excitement of stepping into her future. She wanted stability, a career, and eventually a family. She used to tell her loved ones she'd have at least 3 children, maybe more. But Keely also knew the importance of celebrating the now. And though her actual birthday was on September 7th, she decided to have her night out a bit later, September 18th, a Wednesday. Odd timing, considering her important interview was the very next day at 2 p.m. But she wasn't about to let that stop her. The plan was perfect in her mind. A concert in Birmingham with her best friend Monique, followed by a night of dancing at a popular club. The two friends dressed up for the night, full of energy and excitement. Keely was especially looking forward to seeing a British rapper she adored perform live. The concert was electric, every song a rush of adrenaline. But when the lights came up, they weren't ready to call it a night. They headed to Snobs, a nightclub buzzing with music, lights, and laughter. For the next 3 hours, they drank, danced, and soaked in the atmosphere. Somewhere in the middle of that night, they were joined by an old friend of Keely's, Wesley Street. She'd known him since she was about 10 or 11, and Monique had met him in high school. They weren't best friends, but they had history. Wesley was the life of the party type, loud and animated, the kind of guy you didn't think twice about hanging out with. That night, he was already several drinks in, far more intoxicated than the girls, but still able to keep up with the dancing and joking. The three of them documented the night on Snapchat, laughing, pulling faces for the camera, the kind of carefree videos you expect from a birthday celebration. But as every night out inevitably does, this one wound down. The original plan had been to take the last train home or have Monique's mom pick them up, but instead they got a taxi that dropped them near a pub called Weatherspoons. From there, they all walked to Monique's house so Keely could grab her things. By now it was 4 a.m. Monique begged her to stay the night. It was late, it was dark, and they'd all been drinking. But Keely insisted on sleeping in her own bed before her big interview. She wasn't worried. Wesley would walk her most of the way. He might have been drunk, but he was still bigger than she was, and at just 4'11" and barely 100 pounds, having him nearby made her feel safer. They hugged goodbye, and Monique watched her best friend leave with Wesley. That was the last time she saw her alive. The next day, Monique sent Keely a message on Snapchat. No reply. Hours later, she tried again. "Are you all right? Did you get home okay?" Still nothing. At first, she thought maybe Keely was just getting ready for her interview. But when 2 p.m. came and went and Keely didn't show, the unease began to take hold. This was not like her. Keely was responsible, punctual, and excited for the opportunity. The worry spread quickly. Her family assumed maybe she'd stayed at Monique's after all. But when they learned Monique was looking for her too, panic set in. Keely was reported missing, and the police immediately began their investigation. Meanwhile, Monique went straight to Wesley. He'd been the last person with Keely, and she needed answers. But his reaction wasn't what she expected. He was irritated, defensive, and quick to point out that people were blaming him for her disappearance. His story was shaky from the start, details changing with every retelling. The one constant? He claimed he'd walked her to a phone booth near her house, then left because he felt sick from drinking. The police noticed it too. His contradictions, his unwillingness to cooperate fully. When they brought him along the supposed route he and Keely had walked, his bad attitude persisted. His phone was taken for examination, and though there was no immediate smoking gun in his search history, his discomfort at them having it was obvious. While Wesley was under scrutiny, Keely's family, friends, and even strangers from the community formed search parties. They combed the streets, fields, and streams along the route Wesley claimed to have taken. Then at 9 p.m., a scream ripped through the night. It came from Keely's uncle, Jason Brown. In a small tunnel off a stream, hidden beneath branches and debris, lay Keely's body, face down in the water, her hair tangled in the brush. Her leggings and underwear had been pulled down to her ankles. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The autopsy revealed around 100 injuries, bruises, scratches, hemorrhaging in her mouth, and deep marks on her neck. There were traces of alcohol, but no more than the legal driving limit, along with small amounts of marijuana and MDMA, though neither contributed to her death. Wesley was arrested. His story changed again. First, he denied any sexual contact. Then, when confronted with CCTV and GPS evidence placing him near the body at the time of her death, he claimed she'd fallen off his back during a playful piggyback ride and hit her head. Except there was no head injury. When that didn't hold, he tried a different angle. They'd engaged in consensual sexual activity, and he had accidentally strangled her during intimacy. But the evidence told a different story. Scratches on her neck, scratches on his face that hadn't been there earlier in the night, DNA linking him to her, friends insisting Keely would never have consented to anything with him. The truth was becoming undeniable. Wesley had betrayed the trust of a friend who believed he was walking her home safely. And what investigators were about to uncover next would reveal that Keely might not have been his only victim. As the walls began to close in, Wesley's carefully constructed lies crumbled. Each time he tried to rewrite the night's events, the evidence forced him into another version of the story. But while his words shifted, the core truth never changed. Keely was dead, and he was the last person to see her alive. The police already had more than enough to keep him in their sights. GPS data from his phone pinging near the park at precisely the time her life ended. CCTV showing a figure running from that same location, and items left at the scene. His jacket smeared with makeup matching Keely's, his debit card, and her own clothing discarded in the water. Every clue seemed to shout the same accusation. He was there, and he was involved. Then came the most damning revelation yet: DNA evidence. Tests confirmed his DNA was on Keely's body. That was the moment Wesley changed his story for the last time. Now he admitted to sexual contact, insisting over and over that it had been consensual. He claimed she'd started it, that she wanted it, and that any harm caused had been accidental. He described having his arms around her neck, supposedly in a loving way, until she went floppy and stopped responding. It was a grotesque attempt to reframe the truth, but the physical evidence destroyed his narrative. The marks on her neck weren't gentle. They were desperate signs of a fight for survival. She had clawed at him, leaving scratches across his face, scratches that Monique swore hadn't been there hours earlier. The autopsy painted a picture of a brutal assault, not a tragic accident. Even more chilling was what emerged after his arrest. As the case made headlines, other women began coming forward. They told police about their own encounters with Wesley, stories of violence, coercion, and sexual assault. Some were young teenagers at the time. One victim said she'd been just 16 when he attacked her in 2015. Another was 15 in 2017. Yet another, 20 years old in 2019, the same year Keely died. 5 additional sexual offenses unrelated to Keely's case were filed against him. 2 counts of rape and 3 counts of sexual assault. For many of these women, the publicity around Keely's murder was the catalyst they needed to finally speak. One survivor admitted she had kept silent for years, trapped in shame and fear. But when she saw Wesley's face in the news, she knew she couldn't stay quiet. It became clear to investigators that Wesley's violence wasn't a sudden snap in judgment that night. It was part of a disturbing pattern. And for Keely, the danger wasn't from a stranger in the shadows. It came from someone she knew, someone she trusted enough to walk her home. That misplaced trust was the opening he needed. In July 2020, the trial began. 4 weeks of testimony, evidence, and gut-wrenching impact statements. Keely's family and friends sat in court day after day, hearing Wesley twist the story again in his own defense. He stuck to his claim that her death was a horrible accident during rough sex gone wrong, leaning on a defense that, horrifyingly, had been used by killers in the UK before. But this time, the jury wasn't buying it. prosecutors dismantled his version piece by piece. They showed CCTV from moments before her murder. Keely walking beside Wesley, his arm pulling her in, her body language subtly brushing him off. It wasn't flirtation, it was a quiet no. A signal that she wasn't interested. They argued she had been trying to keep things light, not provoke him, but that her lack of interest wasn't something he could tolerate. The defense clung to the idea that the video could be interpreted as play fighting, as if she was teasing him. But prosecutors countered that Keely's personality, her kindness, her unwillingness to hurt people's feelings, meant she would have rejected him softly, even if she didn't want to be near him in that moment. That softness was no invitation. It was an act of grace he chose to exploit. When confronted about why he stripped her jacket from her body before hiding it, Wesley gave an answer that chilled the courtroom. He said it was because the bright color made it too easy to spot in the water. He claimed he was simply trying to hide the evidence better. The sheer calculation in that decision, meticulously removing a piece of clothing to avoid detection, spoke volumes. He could spend time thinking about concealing her body, yet he left her pants and underwear around her ankles, preserving the indignity of her final moments. And then came the most self-serving moment of his testimony. As to how he felt in the aftermath, he didn't speak about her. He didn't speak about her family, her lost future, the horror of what he'd done. Instead, he said, "I was just thinking, why me? I didn't mean for this to happen. How am I in this position?" It was a chilling window into his mind. Not remorse, but self-pity. Even when asked directly if he thought he was selfish, his answer reeked of self-preservation. "I put her in that pond, and that's something I have to sleep with." Not live with, sleep with. As though his own discomfort was the great tragedy here. The jury saw through it. They deliberated, returned, and delivered the verdict everyone had been waiting for. Guilty. The sentencing hearing brought more pain, as Keely's loved ones delivered their victim impact statements. Her mother, Debbie, spoke of a daughter who was the kindest, most caring, innocent young lady you could ever meet, and said she hoped Wesley would never walk free again. Her father, Christopher, described a once happy home now filled with sadness and emptiness, and siblings who were a shadow of who they used to be. But the court also heard from Wesley's other alleged victims. One spoke of the sickness in her stomach after his attack, a feeling she'd tried to bury until Keely's murder forced her to confront it. Another said guilt and shame had kept her silent, but seeing his name in the news made her realize she needed to stand up, not just for herself, but for Keely and any other woman who might cross his path. Wesley Street was sentenced to 29 years to life, but for Keely's family, there was no sense of victory, only the knowledge that justice, while served, could never bring her back. In the months following the trial, Keely's case had one final ripple effect. Lawmakers in England and Wales, sick of seeing killers hide behind the rough sex gone wrong excuse, passed a reform in 2021 as part of the Domestic Abuse Act. It barred defendants from claiming a victim consented to harm that caused serious injury or death for the purpose of sexual gratification. Keely's murder wasn't the sole reason the law passed, but it was one of the tragedies that pushed it forward. It's a bitter kind of legacy, change born out of loss. But knowing Keely's selfless nature, her family believes she'd be proud if her story could protect others. Still, the caution remains. Keely's death is a brutal reminder that danger doesn't always come from where we expect it. Sometimes it walks beside us, laughs with us, even calls itself a friend. And that is why her story must never be forgotten. From the outside, the story might seem to end here. Trial over, verdict delivered, sentence handed down. But for those who knew Keely, life after the courtroom wasn't a return to normal. It was a new, unfamiliar world where every day was marked by her absence. The places she loved now felt like empty shells, her voice only an echo in the minds of her friends and family. For her parents, there would never again be the sound of her bounding down the stairs, or the sight of her laughing with her siblings at the kitchen table. Birthdays, holidays, even ordinary afternoons became cruel reminders of what had been stolen from them. Every quiet moment in their home carried the weight of a void that could never be filled. And for her friends, especially Monique, the grief came with a heavy side of guilt. She replayed that night in her mind over and over. The hug at 4 a.m., on the insistence that Keely would be fine walking with Wesley. The last look, the last words. Monique had begged her to stay, to take the safer choice. But Keely had been so certain, so trusting. And in that certainty, she'd unknowingly walked into the hands of the man who would take her life. The case also rippled through the community of Tamworth. It wasn't just that a young life had been ended so brutally, it was the betrayal at the core of it. People began to question their own circles. Who could you really trust? How well did you know the people you'd known for years? If Keely's trust could be so catastrophically misplaced, What did that mean for everyone else? In the days following her murder, the stream where her body was found became a place of mourning. Flowers lined the bank, candles flickered in the evening. Handwritten notes from friends and strangers alike were tucked between stones. Some were messages of love, others promises to keep her memory alive, to make sure she wasn't reduced to just another name in the news cycle. But the news coverage was relentless. Headlines painted Wesley as a dangerous predator, and every article seemed to peel back another layer of his past. People began to realize that Keely's death wasn't an isolated, tragic mistake. It was the escalation of a pattern that had gone unchecked for years. Investigators privately acknowledged something chilling. Wesley had likely been on a trajectory toward murder long before that September night. The accounts from his other victims painted him as someone who thrived on control, on taking what he wanted, without concern for consent, boundaries, or consequences. His arrogance in the aftermath, his complaints about being blamed, his casual questions about food while under arrest, only reinforced the image of a man incapable of empathy. And yet, what stood out most wasn't just his lack of remorse, but the calculated nature of his actions after Keely's death. When most people picture an accidental tragedy, they imagine panic, desperate calls for help, an immediate attempt to save the person in danger. Wesley did the opposite. He concealed her body, returned to it multiple times to improve his cover-up, and never once reached out to authorities or her family. This wasn't panic, it was self-preservation, cold and methodical. The prosecution had hammered this point in court, and it stuck with the jury. They knew that his every decision after Keely lost consciousness, whether she was already gone or still clinging to life, was made with one goal: to protect himself. And in protecting himself, he ensured she would never get the chance to be saved. Keely's murder also exposed another grim reality: how predators can weaponize familiarity. We're taught from childhood to be wary of strangers, but that warning rarely extends to the people we've known for years. Keely didn't see Wesley as a threat because history had placed him in the safe category. He wasn't an unknown man in a dark alley. He was someone who'd been in her life for over a decade, and that familiarity disarmed her, giving him exactly the access he needed. It's the reason her case struck such a nerve, especially among young women. The idea that safety isn't always guaranteed in the company of people you trust is unsettling, but it's a reality her story forces us to confront. It's also why her family and friends have worked tirelessly to make her name synonymous, not only with justice, but with awareness. As months passed, Keely's loved ones tried to reclaim her narrative from the brutality of her final moments. They shared photos of her laughing in the sun, stories of her babysitting her cousins, memories of her kindness and wit. They wanted people to remember her for who she was, not just for how she died. And yet, the crime scene images, the autopsy details, the court transcripts, they lingered in the public consciousness. For many, Keely's case became the embodiment of why the rough sex gone wrong defense was so dangerous. Too many victims had been silenced by it, their stories twisted into tales of consensual encounters that simply went too far. In reality, it was a narrative that placed blame on the dead and shielded the living from full accountability. The 2021 reform that followed was a direct blow to that defense. While it came too late to change the course of Keely's trial, it stood as a testament to the impact her case had beyond the courtroom. No longer could someone in England or Wales claim that a victim had consented to their own fatal injuries in pursuit of sexual pleasure. It was a line in the sand, one that ensured the law recognized the obvious truth: you cannot consent to your own death. For Keely's parents, the law was a small comfort in a sea of loss. They had fought to keep her memory alive, to make sure her death meant something more than grief. But no legislation could bring back the daughter they'd raised, the young woman they'd watched blossom into adulthood, the life they'd envisioned her living. In interviews after the trial, her mother would often speak about the little things: Keely's love of children, her dream of teaching, the way she'd light up a room without trying. Her father, quieter but equally devastated, spoke about the hollowness of their home without her. Her siblings, though young, carried the scars too, growing up without the sister who'd always been their protector, their guide. And somewhere deep in the folds of that grief was the unanswered question: why? Why her? Why that night? Why the man she'd trusted? It's a question that will never have a satisfying answer, because the truth is, there was no reason, not one that would make sense to anyone outside of Wesley's twisted logic. The simplest answer is often the hardest to accept. He saw an opportunity, and he took it regardless of the cost. Keely's story is one of tragedy, but it's also one of warnings. It reminds us to trust our instincts, to listen to the unease in our gut, to question situations that don't feel right even when they involve people we think we know. It's a reminder that predators can wear the face of a friend. And maybe, just maybe, it's a call to look out for each other with even more vigilance. To be the voice that insists someone stays the night. To be the friend who won't take no for an answer when safety is on the line. Because for Keely, one more push to stay could have changed everything. In the aftermath of the trial, the streets of Tamworth were quieter, but the silence was heavy, carrying with it an unspoken understanding that something had been lost forever. For weeks, Keely's face still appeared in shop windows and on community notice boards, not as a missing person anymore, but as a reminder of the life that had been taken. People stopped and stared at those posters, not out of curiosity, but out of respect, and in some cases, out of guilt for not realizing sooner the danger that had been walking among them. For Wesley, there would be no more nights out, no more charming his way into social circles. His name had become a permanent stain in the community, a whispered warning between mothers, sisters, and daughters. Even behind bars, his presence lingered in Tamworth like a shadow. People would lower their voices when speaking about him, as though saying his name too loudly might conjure his memory. The ripple effect of his crimes extended far beyond Keely. Those other women who had stepped forward were now part of the public record. Their bravery, a testament to the strength it takes to speak about trauma. For some, telling their story had been cathartic. For others, it reopened wounds they had fought to bury. But all of them understood one thing. They weren't just speaking for themselves. They were speaking for every woman who never got the chance to. In many ways, Keely's story became part of a much larger conversation about the ways society fails victims. How predators slip through the cracks. How previous warnings are often dismissed until it's too late. It raised uncomfortable questions. If Wesley's earlier alleged assaults had been prosecuted more aggressively, would Keely still be alive? Could the system have stopped him before he escalated to murder? Keely's parents refused to let those questions fade into the background. They met with local officials, spoke at community events, and did interviews to highlight not only Keely's story, but also the dangers of predatory behavior hidden behind a familiar face. They wanted young people to know the red flags, to understand that friendship doesn't automatically equal safety. And while the new law banning the rough sex gone wrong defense gave them some small comfort, they knew legislation could only do so much. What they really wanted was cultural change, an end to the subtle victim blaming that often creeps into conversations about sexual violence. They wanted the focus to stay where it belonged, on the choices and actions of the perpetrator, not the decisions of the victim. For Monique, life after the trial was a constant balancing act between grief and guilt. She often revisited her last conversation with Keely, imagining what might have happened if she'd insisted harder, blocked the door, refused to let her leave. In reality, she knew she couldn't have predicted what would happen, but that knowledge did little to ease the weight she carried. She became deeply involved in local safety initiatives, speaking to groups of young women about making backup plans for nights out, about sharing live locations with friends, and about listening to intuition when something feels wrong. Keely's siblings were still too young to fully process the enormity of what had happened, but they felt it all the same. They noticed the absence of her laughter, the way the house seemed quieter without her music playing from upstairs, the missing hugs at the end of a long day. They were told stories of their sister's kindness, her determination, her dreams, stories meant to keep her alive in their memories. Every year on her birthday, the family and close friends gathered to release balloons and share moments they loved most about her. They talked about the way she could make anyone laugh, about her protective streak, about her plans to become a teacher. Those gatherings were bittersweet, full of warmth and love, but also an aching reminder of all the birthdays she would never get to see. And while her loved ones grieved, the legal system moved on. Wesley began serving his sentence, his appeal options limited, his public reputation ruined. In prison, his name carried the weight of his crimes, and among other inmates, being labeled a predator and a murderer of a young woman brought its own dangerous notoriety. But the justice system's punishment was only part of the equation. True justice for Keely's family was impossible. You can lock away the man, but you can't undo the act. You can't give back the years he stole. In the wider public, Keely's murder became one of those cases people referenced when talking about safety. She became a face in conversations about nightlife, consent, and the hidden risks that can arise even in familiar company. Her story was taught in some local school programs as part of lessons on personal safety and consent laws. Teachers spoke her name with reverence, hoping the tragedy could serve as a shield for the next generation. But the hardest truth of all was that Keely's trust was not misplaced because she was naive. It was misplaced because it had been deliberately exploited. Wesley had built himself a place in her life over years. wearing the mask of a friend until the moment he decided to remove it. And by then, it was too late for her to see the danger. In interviews, Keely's father once said something that stuck with everyone who heard it. "We teach our daughters to be kind, to be trusting, to see the best in people. We never imagine that it's those very qualities that could put them in harm's way." It was a statement that cut to the bone because it was true, not just for Keely, but for so many others. Even now, years later, the tunnel where she was found stands as a grim landmark. People pass by and know exactly what happened there. Some avoid it altogether. Others stop, stand for a moment, and remember. It's a place where the weight of what was lost can still be felt in the air, and maybe that's how it should be. An unflinching reminder of the reality that danger can hide behind a familiar smile, that evil doesn't always come in the form of a stranger in the shadows. Sometimes it walks right beside you, laughing, promising to keep you safe. Keely's story doesn't just live on in court transcripts or news articles. It lives in the way people talk to their friends after a night out, in the way they share their location when they didn't before, in the extra glance over the shoulder when walking home. Her name has become a quiet warning, a whispered piece of advice. Be careful, even with the people you know. And that, in many ways, is her legacy. Not just the law that bears the weight of her story, but the countless small changes in behavior, the moments of caution, the decisions that might one day save a life. As the years pass, the rawness of grief begins to change. For Keely's family, it doesn't fade. It simply shifts shape. In the early days, the pain was sharp, consuming every breath. Now it's quieter, but heavier, a constant weight they carry everywhere. It's in the moments they expect to see her walk through the door. It's in the family photos where she should be standing, smiling, alive. It's in the milestones she will never reach. Marriage, children, a career that might have inspired generations of students. Every so often, a stranger will approach them in the street to say they remember Keely's story, that they followed the trial, that they think of her whenever they're making plans with friends late at night. Some have even said her story changed the way they think about their own safety or the safety of their daughters. These moments matter. They don't erase the loss, but they are proof that Keely's life continues to have an impact, far beyond what Wesley Street took from her. The conversation her case sparked still lingers in the UK's cultural consciousness. The rough sex gone wrong defense, once a murky legal loophole, was slammed shut by the Domestic Abuse Act. And while the law cannot undo what happened, it has ensured that no future victim's story will be warped into an excuse for their own death. It is a safeguard born from pain that will quietly protect others for years to come. For her friends, life is measured in before and after. Before, they were carefree. Nights out ending with laughter and sleepy cab rides home. After, there is caution, there are check-in calls, there are shared live locations and rules about never walking alone. It's a sisterhood built from tragedy, each one vowing never to let what happened to Keely happen to someone else if they can help it. Monique, perhaps more than anyone, carries the sharpest edge of that vow. She has turned her grief into action, speaking publicly about her best friend's life, about that last night, and about the dangers that don't always look dangerous. Her talks aren't filled with paranoia or fear-mongering. Rather, they are about awareness, boundaries, and the courage to push back when someone brushes off your concerns. She has said that if even one person makes a safer choice because of Keely's story, then her friend's voice is still echoing in the world. But no amount of awareness can erase the betrayal at the heart of this case. Wesley's crime wasn't committed in a vacuum. It wasn't the act of a man who lost control in a single drunken moment. It was the culmination of years of disregard for the autonomy and safety of others. Keely was simply the one he couldn't walk away from without taking everything. The prosecution's theory, that he hadn't planned her death but seized an opportunity when he found himself alone with her, rang true to many. It was a moment where his desire overrode her right to say no, where the mask of friendship slipped away to reveal the predator beneath. He made a choice, and every action after, the concealment, the lies, the repeated changes in his story, proved he knew exactly what he had done. The tragedy is that Keely never saw it coming. That night, she was celebrating her birthday, thinking about her future, probably still feeling the buzz of the concert's music in her ears. The last thing on her mind was danger, not from Wesley, not from anyone. She walked away from Monique's door believing she was safe. That belief cost her everything. In telling her story, it's tempting to focus only on the crime, the horror, the betrayal, the trial. But to stop there would be to let Wesley define her life by its ending. Keely was more than her final moments. She was the warmth in a crowded room, the steady hand for her siblings, the friend who made sure no one felt left out, the young woman who dreamed of teaching and raising a family. She was a person with plans, with love to give, with so much more to do. Her life is worth remembering in full, not just as a warning, but as an example of how deeply one person can touch the lives of those around them. The tragedy lies not only in the violence that ended her life, but in the everyday beauty that violence stole from the world. When her parents speak of her now, there's a softness in their voices, even through the pain. They talk about her kindness, her determination, her joy. They talk about the silly moments, the family dinners, the small acts of generosity she gave without expecting anything in return. And in those stories, Keely is alive again, if only for a moment. For the people watching this, Keely's story holds lessons we cannot ignore. It's about trust, yes, but also about vigilance. It's about understanding that danger doesn't always announce itself, and that the face of a predator can be one you've known for years. It's about refusing to let politeness override instinct, and about having the courage to be the friend who insists on safety, even if it means being the pushy one for a night. The night Keely died, she told Monique she'd be fine because Wesley was with her. That single belief that she was safe in his company became the thread that unraveled everything. If her story teaches us anything, it's that we must examine the foundations of our trust and never take it for granted. And so, as her family continues to honor her memory, as her friends work to protect others in her name, as the law itself bears traces of her case, Keely's presence remains. Not in the way they would have chosen, not in the way she deserved, but in a way that still carries her forward. Some stories fade as time passes. This one can't. It shouldn't. Because the lessons it holds are as relevant today as they were the night she walked into the dark with someone she thought was a friend. Keely Bunker was 20 years old. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. She was loved, she was trusted, and she deserved to live out every dream she carried in her heart. Her life was taken by someone unworthy of that trust, but her name will outlast his, for Keely, for her family, for every person who has ever felt unsafe in the presence of someone they know. Her story matters. And as you leave this video, I want you to remember this. Safety is not just about avoiding strangers. It's about knowing that sometimes the real danger is the one that smiles at you, the one you think you understand. Trust your instincts, watch out for each other, and never ever be afraid to insist on safety, because one decision can mean the difference between getting home and never making it there at all. This has been her story. Let it be a reminder. Let it be a warning. And most of all, let it be a promise that her voice, though silenced, will never be forgotten.